9 Celebrity mysteries that are still unsolved. Celebrities are victims of seemingly unrestricted access to their private lives, since they are always spied on and documented by the media. In some cases though, their fame and popularity proved to be insufficient in saving them from dying or even in finding the true cause of their death. Of course, homicide cases frequently go unsolved not only for decades, sometimes even longer, yet one would expect the police would have an easier job in discovering the killer, if there is one, when the victim is famous. However, many of the celebrity murder and mysterious death cases end up closed, after years of fruitless searching. Still, some of them remain open, and even decades after the murder authorities are still attempting to piece together what actually happened. Who wouldn't want to know the events behind Marilyn Monroe's untimely demise, even if it's been over 50 years? Who doesn't want to know the truth behind the night Princess Diana's car crashed, resulting in her tragic and heartbreaking death? Will we ever find the answers to these tragic events? One can only hope. As of now, however, these 7 celebrity deaths are still unsolved, and at least for now remain a mystery.
1. The death of Mary Rogers. Mary Rogers was a Kardashian of the 1840s. The pretty girl became a hit in social circles, based on her looks alone. A brief disappearance, thought to have been done to drum up publicity for the shop she worked at, made headlines across the eastern seaboard. But her mysterious death made waves that even affected Edgar Allan Poe. Mary was born around 1820 in Lyme, Connecticut. She and her widowed mother, Phoebe, moved to New York in the 1930s. Phoebe ran a boarding house while Mary worked at a cigar shop. Anderson's Tobacco Emporium was one of the most popular cigar stores in New York. Writers Washington Irving and James Fenimore Cooper were known to frequent the shop. Mary, a beautiful young woman, was certainly a draw for the young men of New York. The press dubbed Mary the beautiful cigar girl, and her looks alone made her a celebrity. On October 5, 1838, Mary was reported missing by the local papers, causing a minor hysteria. Her mom Phoebe claimed to have found a suicide note, authenticated by the local coroner. The next day, however, the papers declared this was all a hoax, and that Mary had been visiting friends in Brooklyn, and hypothesized that it was all a publicity stunt for Anderson's Tobacco Emporium. She returned to work at the shop, but it wasn't long before she quit, and went home to help her mother run her boarding house. Mary had plenty of attention amongst the male boarders, but one in particular caught her eye, Daniel Payne. They got engaged in the summer of 1841. On July 25, 1841, Mary left home to visit her aunt uptown. She was never heard from again. At first, people assumed she had just run away, likely for attention or to escape her fiancé. After 2 days with no word from her, Daniel filed a missing persons report. It was July 28, when a couple of locals were down by the Hudson River, near a popular tourist attraction, Sybil's Cave, when they saw a body floating in the river. Mary's ex-boyfriend, Arthur Crommelin, had recently joined the search, and arrived in Hoboken just as the body was retrieved. He identified the body as Mary Rogers. Arthur was a suspect for a time because of the coincidental timing of his appearance, but he was eventually ruled out. Daniel became a suspect as well after rumors surfaced that he and Mary were fighting a lot, and she threatened to call off the wedding. But he provided a solid alibi. After that, police were out of suspects. The story was in all the New England newspapers. The governor of New York, William H. Seward, even offered a reward for information on the crime. Edgar Allan Poe was an avid follower of the case, and began work on a book based on Mary's story. In early September, 1841, some boys playing near Sybil's Cave found a pile of bloody clothes in what would become known as the murder thicket. Their mother, Frederica Loss, who operated the Nickmore House pub, alerted the police. She remembered that on July 25 or 26, Mary and an unknown man had checked into the Nickmore house. They went out that night, and she never saw them return, but didn't think much of it until the boys found the bloody clothes. On October 7, 1841, Daniel visited the murder thicket. After a drinking binge across Hoboken, Daniel drank an entire bottle of laudanum, and died on a bench outside Sybil's cave. There was a suicide note in his pocket: "To the world, here I am on the spot. God forgive me for my misfortune in my misspent time." Edgar Allan Poe published the first part of The Mystery of Marie Roget in November 1842, with the second part coming the following month. The story was set in Paris, but other than that and changed names, the story was a faithful retelling of the Mary Rogers case. Considered a sequel to the murders at the Rue Morgue, Poe thought himself a keen detective and claimed that he knew who murdered Mary Rogers. He even said as much to editors in a desire to get it published faster. If Poe did know who murdered Mary Rogers, he never named names. New details about the case came out at the end of 1842 that caused Poe to delay publication of the third and final installment of The Mystery of Marie Roget. He needed to make minor changes that suggested he knew about these new developments the whole time. You see, Frederica Loss was accidentally shot by one of her sons on November 6, 1842. She did not die immediately, rather, she lived for 10 days, in pain that caused her to babble in a mixture of English and German. One of the proclamations she made in this state was about Mary Rogers. She said that Mary and the unidentified man who checked into her inn were there to undertake a premature delivery. The term at the time for an abortion. Mary died during the illegal operation, and Frederica's sons dumped the body and scattered the bloody clothes. Later, it would be suggested that Frederica was actually an assistant to notorious abortionist Madame Restel. Frederica's two eldest sons were briefly considered suspects in Mary's death. Charges were brought against them for improper disposal of a body, but with no evidence, and Frederica's unreliable confession, the charges didn't stick. It wasn't long before police gave up on the case. With no suspects, few clues, and the growing suspicion that this was an abortion gone wrong, there was nothing else for the police to do. To this day, Mary Rogers' death remains unsolved. As an interesting epilogue, Mary's former employer, John Anderson, died in 1881. In the years leading up to his death, he was reported to be unstable, and claimed that Mary's ghost was haunting him. He seemed to mean that both literally and figuratively, blaming his association with the dead girl as a reason he was unable to cross over from business to politics. During the extended legal battle over his fortune, one of the opposing lawyers suggested that John Anderson gave Poe $5,000 to write the story of Marie Roget in order to draw people's attention from himself, who, many believed, was her murderer. These claims were never confirmed.
2. The death of George Reeves. On June 16, 1959, George Reeves gave millions of children worldwide firm evidence of why it's important to separate fantasy from reality. Because on that day, in the world of make-believe, Superman was not faster than a speeding bullet. But in reality it was the day that George Reeves was discovered in the wee morning hours, on his bed with a bullet to the temple. Apparently self-inflicted. Although the official police report would list Reeves' death as a suicide, his mother insisted her young, happy son was incapable of killing himself. To this day, there are 3 possible scenarios that explain the death of George Reeves. Born George Kiefer Brewer in 1914 in Woolstock, Iowa to Helen Lesser and Don C. Brewer, young George would grow up in Ashland, Kentucky and later in Pasadena, California where his sister also lived. It was in California where George would take up boxing and amass a record of 31-0, by the time he was 20. But his somewhat controlling mother insisted that he preserve his handsome looks and give a shot at showbiz. So young George hit the stage at the famed Pasadena Playhouse. His talents would soon be noticed, garnering him roles in such films as Gone with the Wind, The Strawberry Blonde and Proudly We Hail. But then came the war. After his return from his duties in WI, George would find his career in the dumps. Relegated to numerous small B-movie roles, from which he would find it difficult to make a living, George realized he needed a big break, so he turned to television. Although he considered TV work to be the low-hanging fruit of his profession, George was desperate, so he took a part in a low-budget movie called Superman and the Mole People that was to serve as a pilot for a forthcoming television series. He shot 26 segments in the first year, but they would not be aired until 1952. By this time, George was reaching a pudgy 38 years old, but the series would go on to become a huge smash, as they say in the business. Between 1953 and 1957, George would film 104 episodes, making his character famous worldwide. But he began to sense problems with his newfound fame. The same problem that would eventually curse other actors in the business. George was becoming typecast in his character. George Reeves would never be anybody but Superman. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, unbeknownst to the majority of his legion of fans, George Reeves was keeping a huge, and potentially damaging secret. He was involved in a relationship not only with a married woman, but with the wife of an MGM Studios executive. Tony Mannix was married to Eddie Mannix, a purported former crime boss who was now employed as a fixer for the studio, someone who keeps the studio's actors' personal lives out of the news. It has been widely reported that Eddie Mannix knew about his wife's relationship with Reeves, but that he enjoyed his open relationship. Tony loved to treat her new beau like a king, and George liked having his sugar mama. She would buy him a new car, open up a nice bank account for him, and even go so far as to purchase him a home at 1579 Benedict Canyon Road for $12,000. Wonder what that house is worth today. But along with the nice things, would come the bad side of Tony. She was controlling, manipulative, and, overall, just a real bitch. George would eventually sever the relationship, setting up scenario number 1 for his death. George would soon hook up with Lenore Lemon, a New York showgirl who had at one time been banned from performing at many of Manhattan's clubs, because of her reputation as a troublemaker. Nice girl. Not only was Lemon reported to have had some kind of connections with the mob back east, but she was also an extremely jealous sort, who was known to overreact upon even the smallest of suspicions. What a deadly combination of characteristics. Could Lemon's drunken fit of jealousy have led to scenario number 2? After a year of dating, George and Lenore would announce their engagement to be married, but not before receiving numerous death threats on George's life that included phone calls, traffic accidents, and even one incident in which George would wreck his car before discovering that all of the brake fluid had been drained. Oh, and no leak was ever discovered. Hey, be quiet. I'm trying to sleep up here. On June 15, 1959, 3 days before he and Lenore were to become married, and go on their honeymoon to Spain, the couple hosted a small party at their house. Having already retired to his bedroom, George descended the stairs in the modest abode, and yelled at the guests to keep the noise down. As the sulking George returned to his upstairs bedroom, his intoxicated fiancée would jokingly exclaim, "Oh no, he'll probably go up to his room and shoot himself." A few minutes later, at approximately 12:30, a gunshot would ring out from Reeves' bedroom. A male guest, Bill Bliss, would run upstairs to check on George, only to find the despondent actor on his bed with a .30 caliber Luger pistol on the floor between his feet, and hole in the side of his head. No suicide note was found. The police investigation concluded that the facts surrounding George's death indicated suicide, but that the investigation was an arduous one due to the intoxicated state of the house guests. His toxicology report would later indicate that his blood alcohol level at the time of his death was .27, well beyond the legal minimum for intoxication. Woo, Superman did some drinking that night. Because of the mountain of evidence that doesn't quite match up with the facts of his death, many speculate, even to this day, that George was murdered. Among some of the facts are: no fingerprints on the gun. Was it wiped clean? The spent shell casing was found underneath Reeves' body. There were no powder marks found on Reeves' body. He had several fresh bruises, and the location of the entrance and exit wounds did not line up with the path of the bullet indicated by its entrance into the wall. Reeves' mother would later open an investigation by private detectives, who concluded that the death was not a suicide. No charges were ever brought up as a result of Reeves' death. George Reeves, in the gray double-breasted suit that he used as Clark Kent on Superman, would be buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. His marker would read, "My beloved son Superman George Beslow Reeves, January 6, 1914 – June 16, 1959. In his will, George would leave his $71,000 worth of assets, including his Benedict Canyon house, not to his fiancée, but to Tony Mannix. Eddie Mannix would die in 1963, Tony Mannix in 1983. We may never solve the mystery surrounding the death of the Man of Steel.
3. Jack Nance. His name was less celebrated than his mane, but for a generation of cult movie fans, Jack Nance's towering hair and woebegone gaze in David Lynch's bizarre first feature, Eraserhead, 1978, made him the Elvis of alienation. For Nance, it wasn't much of a stretch to play the movie's gloomy anti-hero, who was beset by panic and hallucinations when his girlfriend presented him with a slimy reptilian baby. Off-screen, the actor was a nonconformist, a bit of a loner with a sometimes abrasive attitude. Director Lynch told reporters on January 3 that Nance had a bad temper, and used to say that, given his poor physical condition, he wouldn't be too hard to kill. That grim prophecy may have come true. At 5 a.m. on December 29, according to friends, Nance sprawled with two men outside Winchell's Donut House across the street from his inexpensive South Pasadena, California, apartment. Actress Catherine Case and her fiancé, screenwriter Leo Bulgarini, met him that afternoon at another coffee shop in the neighborhood and saw he had a black eye. "I told off some kid," she says Nance told her. "I guess I got what I deserved." Maybe he got more. Looking for Nance the next day, Bulgarini went to the actor's apartment and found him crumpled on the bathroom floor. Police later said that Nance, 53, probably died of blunt force trauma to the head. Police have left open the possibility that Nance, who suffered 2 minor strokes in the past 18 months, might have died from a fall. But given the nature of the injury and the fight, at least one suspect hit Mr. Nance in the head with his fist, a police report says. They launched a murder investigation, reviewing security videotapes from the strip mall, where the fight occurred, and interviewing workers at the donut shop. 4 weeks later, they had still found no leads. "I can't imagine what happened," says actress Catherine E. Coulson, another veteran of the Eraserhead cast and Nance's wife, from 1968 to 1976. "It's incredibly sad because he was really gifted, as much a character in real life as he was on the screen and stage." Nance, who grew up in Dallas, was never comfortable with the kind of convention represented by his parents, Hoyt Nance, 73, a former Neiman Marcus executive, and Agnes, 72, a homemaker. The oldest of 3 boys, Jack took up acting at North Texas State University in the early 1960s, and liked it so much he quit school and moved to California to study at the Pasadena Playhouse, a local theater. Then, as always, he cared very little for money and material things, says his brother Richard Nance, 48, a software firm executive. He was incredibly focused on acting. Nance made a living in small film and theater roles, but he never flirted with mainstream fame. Cult status was another matter, thanks to Lynch, who, after Eraserhead, cast Nance as Pete Martell in his short-lived TV series Twin Peaks, and also used him in the movies Blue Velvet, 1986, Wild at Heart, 1990, and the upcoming release Lost Highway, due February 21. But steady work wasn't Nance's only worry. In 1991, his second wife, Callie Jean Van Dyke Nance, the daughter of Jerry, Coach, Van Dyke, and niece of Dick Van Dyke, hanged herself just 6 months after the wedding. Her father said Callie Jean, a secretary, had abused alcohol and prescription drugs, popping Quaaludes from age 13. "One way or the other, drugs will kill you," Jerry Van Dyke told reporters at the time. Nance, according to his brother, never did get over the death of his wife. Richard says Nance also battled alcoholism, and had been in a recovery group for 10 years. He was fired from the film Joyride last year, after showing up on the set drunk. "He was a nice guy and very funny," says the movie's executive producer Lauren Zilber, "but it's tough to work when someone's drunk all day." Later, Nance acted in the TV movie Little Witches, but on the final day of the shoot, his car was in a 6-car pileup. He got beat up and injured his knee, says Richard Nance. He was walking with a cane. On Thanksgiving Day, Richard Nance went to see his brother, who had moved to a South Pasadena neighborhood where rents were low. "I'm right back where I started," Richard Nance says his brother told him, referring to his days in the local playhouse. But he had found a new passion, writing. Before he died, Nance was working on a screenplay with Bulgrini called Dicks and Bruises, a quirky tale of two crooks who get conned, and writing a novel. The title was derelict on all fours, says Richard Nance. It was somewhat autobiographical, an angry piece of work.
4. Johnny Stompanato. Lana Turner, one of Hollywood's greatest beauties and sex symbols, she was the original Sweater Girl, was discovered in 1936 by Hollywood reporter-editor Billy Wilkerson, after she skipped a high school typing class in favor of a Coca soda fountain in Hollywood. Struck by her beauty and figure, Wilkerson gave Turner his card and introduced her to an agent, who promptly got the attractive 15-year-old a part in an otherwise forgettable low-budget film called They Won't Forget. Hollywood soon beat a path to her door, and Lana became one of the most sought-after actresses in the industry. Men were similarly attracted to her, but the success Lana found as a Hollywood leading lady was not something she could duplicate in her personal life. She would be married 7 times in all. None of her unions would last more than 4 years. The relationship for which Lana is perhaps most remembered was not a marriage, but an affair. It was both emotionally and physically violent, and it ended in a most unexpected and shocking way. Lana met Johnny Stompanato during the spring of 1957, shortly after divorcing actor Lex Barker, her 4th husband. She fell for Stompanato's good looks, and his prowess as a lover, but when she discovered his ties to gangster Mickey Cohen, Stompanato was his bodyguard and enforcer, she tried to break off the affair, fearing bad publicity. But Stompanato was not easily dissuaded, and over the following year, the two of them became entangled in a relationship marked by violent arguments, physical abuse and serial reconciliations. Stompanato had already lived a life of adventure. A Marine War veteran, he converted to Islam in order to marry a Turkish woman. After World War II he spent time in China and claimed he ran nightclubs, though in truth he was only a civil bureaucrat. He was also a gigolo, being spotted frequently in public on the arms of beautiful, older women on whom he was financially dependent. He'd been married at least twice before meeting Lana Turner, but nothing had ever lasted more than 2 years. Neither Lana, nor her daughter Cheryl Crane, her daughter from her second marriage, were enamored of Stompanato by the end, but in the beginning, when he was courting her, Lana found him very persuasive. I believed the lies a man told me, and by the time I learned they were lies it was too late, she would write years later. He was utterly considerate, and I began to warm toward him physically. His wooing was gentle, persistent and finally persuasive. Shortly after their relationship became public, one of Lana's close friends told her that the man she knew as John Steele was actually mob affiliate John Stompanato. The warning was not enough for Lana to break it off. "Call it forbidden fruit or whatever," she wrote. "This attraction was very deep, maybe something sick within me. And my dangerous captivation went far beyond lovemaking." While in England filming Another Time, Another Place with Sean Connery, Lana hoped on the one hand that when she'd said goodbye to Johnny in Los Angeles, he would follow his previous pattern and move on to another woman. But on the other, Lana soon found herself lonely and reached out to him, asking Johnny to join her. In England, Johnny became physically violent with Lana for the first time. Bored and complaining bitterly about Lana's reluctance to be seen in public with him, an argument escalated to a shoving match. "I reached for the phone, but he knocked it away and lunged for my throat," she wrote. "As his grip closed around my larynx, I managed to let out a loud scream, though I could feel the strain on my vocal cords." Because he'd entered England illegally, using a passport with the alias John Steele, Lana was able to get him deported. But she would eventually have to return to the United States, where he would be waiting. The 1958 Academy Awards marked a milestone in Lana's acting career. She'd been nominated for Best Actress for her performance in Peyton Place. But they also helped set off the final, fatal convulsion that spelled the end of Johnny Stompanato. A photograph of Lana and Cheryl from that night at the awards dinner showed a spectacular Lana in a form-fitting strapless white lace gown. With her wide, bright eyes, flawless skin, charming smile and beautiful platinum blonde hair, Lana and daughter Cheryl, more modestly attired in a green taffeta gown, were the distilled essence of Hollywood glamour and royalty. Watching the ceremony from his home in Beverly Hills, Stompanato grew angrier by the moment. When Lana returned home from a round of post-Oscar parties, he was in the grip of a violent rage. "You'll never leave me home again," he roared. "That's the last time." After castigating Lana for not winning the Best Actress Oscar, and for her growing dependency on alcohol, he began slapping her face. "He cracked me a second time, this time knocking me down. I staggered back against the chaise and slid to the floor," she wrote. "He yanked me up and began hitting me with his fists. I went flying across the room into the bar, sending glasses shattering on the floor. Picking her up again, he grabbed her shoulders and peered down at her. 'Now do you understand?' he asked. 'You will never leave me out of something like that again. Ever.' Underlying everything was my shame," she wrote in her biography. "I was so ashamed. I didn't want anybody to know my predicament, how foolish I'd been, how I'd taken him at face value and been completely duped." Lana lay bruised and bleeding in bed the day after the Academy Awards ceremony. Beside her lay a sleeping Johnny Stompanato, completely unaware of his approaching end. Forever afterward Lana would speak of it only as the happening. Cheryl would not speak of it at all. It began on a Friday evening. Lana and Johnny were fighting and Lana would remember later, she knew this fight would be a bad one. They were in her bedroom. Cheryl was in her room next door. Cheryl could easily hear everything that was being said. After the Academy Awards, Cheryl had seen her mother's bruised face. There was no question John was beating her. Cheryl never saw, and never claimed she saw, Johnny hit Lana. But the after-effects, in London, and after the Oscars, were impossible to deny. Outside the bedroom, Cheryl begged her mother and Johnny to stop. "Cheryl, get away from that door." Lana yelled back. "I'm not going to tell you again." Cheryl wasn't going anywhere. But her mother matched her stubbornness. She wouldn't open the door, Cheryl recalled. She said, "Go back to your room. John is leaving." Only he wasn't leaving. Instead he started making threats. He would cut Lana's face. He would kill Lana's mother. "And I'll get your daughter, too." As the argument raged, Cheryl went to the kitchen and grabbed a carving knife. Johnny and Lana had actually bought it that same day. Cheryl went back upstairs and stood outside her mother's closed door. The argument started to dissipate. Stompanato was leaving the house. He pulled a set of clothes and some heavy, wooden hangers out of the closet. Still holding the knife, Cheryl pleaded with her mother to open the door, which an exhausted Lana finally did. Lana stood between Cheryl and Johnny. Johnny was facing the door and looking at Lana, with a raised arm holding his clothes over his shoulder so that all Cheryl could see was the arm, and some kind of weapon. As he moved past Lana toward the door, his arm upraised holding something. Cheryl thrust her arm out. From Lana's point of view it looked only as though Cheryl had punched Johnny hard in the stomach. "Oh, my God, Cheryl, what have you done?" he gasped. Then he pirouetted and collapsed to the floor. His eyes closed and he wheezed horribly, mortally. Johnny Stompanato was dying on the carpet of Lana Turner's new home. Cheryl dropped the knife and backed away. To her horror Lana realized now what had just happened. Cheryl had not punched John, she'd stabbed him. Lana went to Cheryl, who was sobbing, and helped her to her room. Then she returned to tend to the dying Stompanato. He was unconscious by the time he hit the floor. His breathing was heavy. Lana took the knife and dropped it in the sink in the pink marble bar. Then she called her mother. Within minutes a doctor and Lana's mother were there. Turner gave Johnny mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The doctor gave Stompanato a shot of adrenaline directly into his heart. But it was too late. Johnny Stompanato, war hero, actor wannabe, two-bit hood, gigolo and abuser, was dead. The coroner's inquest into the death of Johnny Stompanato was a white-hot television event, filling up the largest courtroom in the Beverly Hills Hall of Records. 3 out of 4 seats in the court were reserved for the press. CBS and ABC broadcast the inquest live and it went out by radio as well. Interest in the case was enormous. Box office receipts for Peyton Place, already quite healthy, increased by a third immediately after Johnny's death. By an amazing coincidence, one of Lana's key scenes in the movie was a courtroom interrogation in which she was questioned about crimes committed by her daughter. Lines formed for the relative handful of public seats at 6 a.m. just before 9 o'clock, under a merciless sun cruelly intensified by TV lights and flashbulbs. Lana, Stefan Crane and their lawyer Jerry Geisler entered the building, and were hustled into the courtroom. Because he was the person who had identified Stompanato's body at the morgue, mobster Mickey Cohen was the first person called to testify. An inveterate showman, he made waves in court by refusing to identify the body on the grounds "I may be accused of this murder." After only 2 minutes on the stand he was excused, and left the building. The coroner produced an autopsy report showing that not even a whole team of doctors could have saved Johnny's life from the wound inflicted by Cheryl Crane. He had been stabbed a single time in the abdomen. After slicing Stompanato's kidney, the carving knife had struck a vertebra and twisted upward, puncturing his aorta. Even disregarding that mortal wound, the coroner believed that Johnny probably wouldn't have lived another 10 years because of his bad liver. For the first hour, she answered questions from the coroner, his deputy and Geisler while a 10-man, 2-woman jury watched, riveted. She hardly made eye contact with her questioners, staring instead at the far end of the courtroom where the wall and ceiling met. Twice she broke down on the stand. Speaking quietly, she explained as best she could why she stayed with a man who beat her. Under Geisler's gentle and considerate questioning she recalled a moment-by-moment account of the argument leading up to the stabbing. When she finished, the coroner asked for a recess, and the press instantly crowded around Lana, who was on the verge of fainting, when Geisler maneuvered her away from the commotion. Reporters talked among themselves about her performance on the stand. The jury deliberated less than a half hour before deciding that John Stompanato's death was a case of justifiable homicide. Acting out of fear for her life and for that of her mother, they found that Cheryl Crane had been justified in using deadly force to stop Johnny. The decision was not unanimous, but it did not have to be. Though the inquest verdict was not binding on the prosecution, the next day a decision was made not to pursue charges. Among those outraged by the verdict was Mickey Cohen. "It's the first time in my life I've ever seen a dead man convicted of his own murder," he said colorfully. "So far as that jury's concerned, Johnny just walked too close to that knife." Johnny Stompanato's family later brought a wrongful death lawsuit against Lana Turner. It was settled out of court.
5. Ronni Chasen. Left with more questions than answers a day, after a well-known movie publicist was shot to death on a winding side street here, a stunned Hollywood started scripting possible scenarios of its own. Was Ronni Chasen, a veteran press agent and Oscar strategist, simply the victim of a carjacking gone terribly wrong? Had the killer followed her as she drove home from a premiere party for the movie Burlesque? Did somebody want Miss Chasen dead? Was the person, or people, responsible in the car with her? Detectives were investigating all of those questions, and more on Wednesday, but appeared as lost as Miss Chasen's friends and clients when it came to making sense of the crime. Early Tuesday, Miss Chasen, 64, was shot repeatedly in the chest, while driving on palm tree-lined Whittier Drive, often used as a cut-through between Sunset and Wilshire Boulevards. Her black Mercedes-Benz crashed into a street light, and the airbags deployed. She was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 1:30 a.m., although witnesses reported hearing 5 gunshots. The police on Wednesday would say only that Miss Chasen suffered multiple gunshot wounds, pending the results of a coroner's report. Adding to the mystery, despite a shattered passenger window, there's no damage to the car that I'm aware of from the gunshots, said Sergeant Lincoln Hoshino of the Beverly Hills Police Department. The person could have been in the car, outside the car, could have walked up to the car, driven up, we don't know at this point. Sergeant Hoshino said investigators were collecting security camera images from home and business cameras along the stretch of Sunset Boulevard Miss Chasen had driven before turning on to Whittier. The killing, one of only 3 this year in Beverly Hills, according to the police, stunned a clubby film industry in which Miss Chasen had been a fixture for 3 decades, getting her start as a bit player on soap operas before quickly making the transition to the dark arts of publicity and Oscar campaigning. On Wednesday, the Palm Springs International Film Festival, a client of Miss Chasen's, offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of her killer. About 150 people turned out for an impromptu memorial at the Four Seasons Hotel here on Tuesday night. The Oscar-winning producer Scott Rudin was helping to plan a similar gathering in New York City for Wednesday night. The death of Miss Chasen, whose hard-charging and abrupt style was softened by a petite frame, quick smile and perfectly blown-out blonde hair, hit a nerve in Hollywood in part because she was seemingly everywhere, lunching at industry-watering holes, where she would always pluck a tiny bottle of sweetener from her purse for the iced tea, and attending virtually every awards dinner, charity event and premiere. Unmarried and without children, Miss Chasen focused all of her attention on her clients. Just 6 minutes before her death, she left a voice message at her office with a to-do list for her lieutenants to tackle when they arrived at work the next morning. Alan Citron, a former reporter for the Los Angeles Times, recalled a vintage moment from 1990, when Miss Chasen was working on behalf of Giancarlo Peretti, an Italian investor who took, and ultimately lost control of MGM. Miss Chasen met Mr. Citron for lunch at the Polo Lounge, and playfully threatened to kill me if we didn't lay off him, Mr. Citron said. When he laughed, Miss Chasen picked up her butter knife, and jokingly pressed it against his chest. When she represented you she was an unshakable support, said the producer Donald DeLine, whose credits include Burlesque. Vivian Meyer-Siskind, a fellow publicity veteran, noted that Miss Chasen, a close friend, had a charming sense of self-awareness. She was the first one to point out that she was pushy, or could drive people crazy, and that was part of her success, Miss Meyer-Siskind said. Armed with a New York accent and a dry wit, Miss Chasen was one of a handful of elite strategists employed by studios to influence the Oscars. In a clever business move, she cornered the publicity market for composers and songwriters, thus making herself an indispensable part of the best song and best score niches of the Oscar race. I'm really almost paralyzed by this, said the producer Richard D. Zanuck, who, backed by a campaign orchestrated by Miss Chasen, won an Oscar for driving Miss Daisy. Miss Chasen grew up in the Washington Heights and Riverdale sections of New York, the daughter of a real estate broker and a homemaker. As a child, Miss Chasen was athletic and gregarious, entering and winning yo-yo contests organized by the Duncan Toys Company, according to her brother, Larry Cohen. It was Mr. Cohen, a director and writer of B-movies, who gave Miss Chasen one of her first publicity jobs, promoting his 1973 blaxploitation movie Hell Up in Harlem. She played in one or two soap operas, I can't remember which, but the rejection of acting wasn't for her, Mr. Cohen said. She was a natural publicist, though. Oh, how she loved to throw a party.
6. David Carradine. Carradine, 72, was discovered naked and hanged in the wardrobe of his Bangkok hotel room on Thursday morning. A rope was tied around his neck and another around his genitals. An autopsy has yet to determine the cause of death, and Thai police said they could not rule out suicide or a sex game gone wrong. The star's personal manager, Chuck Binder, rejected the suicide theory but told CNN's Larry King, I don't know if you want to call it accidental. I got some calls from Thailand today from a producer that worked with him. I don't want to get into the middle of this whole investigation, but this guy said to me for sure there was foul play. Tarantino, who revived Carradine's career by casting him in Kill Bill, described the star of 1970s series Kung Fu as one of Hollywood's great, mad geniuses. Asked if Carradine would have liked his death to be the subject of such fevered speculation, Tarantino agreed. He told CNN, if the last chapter of his autobiography was The Mysterious Demise of David Carradine, that would be perfect. Michael Madsen, Carradine's Kill Bill co-star, added, I think he would like it that way. It's a typical David way to go, The Mysterious Death of David Carradine. Rob Schneider, the actor and director who appeared with Carradine in 2007 comedy Big Stan, said there were parallels with the case of Bruce Lee, whose death in 1973 sparked numerous conspiracy theories. The truth is, I think David always felt that he took the kung fu role that was originated from Bruce Lee. I think it's a really odd and beautiful mystery that it's the same way as Bruce Lee. We'll never know exactly what happened with Bruce Lee, said Schneider. A maid discovered Carradine's body in the luxury suite of the kiIIer Park Hotel in Bangkok, after she knocked on the door and received no response. The actor was in the city to make a film. "This certainly was not a natural cause of death," said nantana chief coroner at Bangkok's Chulalongkorn Hospital, adding that toxicology tests had been ordered. Police Chief Colonel Sopre Salyanchuam said the investigation was continuing. "We are currently interviewing witnesses, film crew, hotel staff and the last person who saw David alive. So far, no one saw anyone enter David's room around the estimated time of death." Aurelio Gallardo, the hotel's general manager, said the actor checked into the hotel on May 31 and appeared in good spirits, chatting with staff and entertaining guests by playing piano in the lobby. "I was a fan. I had a very nice talk with him when he checked in. He was very much a person full of life. I mentioned to him that I had seen the film, Crank, with my family, and that was the last smile he gave me," Mr. Gallardo said. Carradine's wife, Annie, and close friends rejected suggestions that the actor deliberately took his own life, despite the fact he had spoken openly of contemplating suicide in the past. Michael Madsen said, "I don't think he was suicidal by any stretch of the imagination. I talked to Annie and she said the most important thing she wanted everybody to know is that David was not suicidal, he was not depressed and he was not going to do something like that." Tarantino added, "There might have been a period of David's long life that he could have been suicidal, but this wasn't the time."
7. Jill Dando. In a series of articles, the Bristol Post will be highlighting all the unsolved murders committed, or connected to the city. The first in the series starts with a mystery, which has baffled the nation for more than 17 years. Weston-super-Mare's Jill Dando was one of the seaside town's most famous, and much-loved residents. Shock took hold of the area when it was revealed she had been gunned down outside her London home. Police thought they found the killer, a loner, obsessed with the Crime Watch presenter. But he was the wrong man and spent 8 years in prison, for a crime he didn't commit. 17 years on and after a lot of speculation, Jill's family are still no closer to finding out who killed the cheerful and loving mum. The Golden Girl of the BBC was returning home when she reached the door of her home in Fulham on April 26, 1999. But before she could get her keys in her door, before she was shot once in the head with a 9mm bullet. There was no sign of a struggle, and the killing was said to have taken place from close range at 11:30 am, broad daylight. Immediately suspicion and the execution style of the shooting led to speculation that Jill Dando was the victim of a professional hit. A silencer was even thought to be used on the gun as neighbors did not hear the firing. Aged just 37 years old and engaged at the time, Jill was in the prime of her career, a household name. But she worked often as an investigative journalist, and on the television show Crime Watch, which meant somewhere along the line she had probably made enemies with the wrong people. Another line of inquiry also being considered was that Jill could have been murdered by an obsessed stalker, which for some television presenters becomes an occupational hazard. Leading the inquiry from the outset was Detective Chief Inspector Hamish Campbell, who said at the time, it could either be a stalker or a hitman. However, there are many theories to be explored, and nothing will be left untouched. Detectives believe the killer had staked out her home for at least an hour before the shooting, and there were said to be 7 sightings of a smartly dressed man carrying a mobile phone, who might have donned heavy black-framed spectacles in an attempt to disguise himself, outside her £400,000 two-story home. Jill's body was discovered by a neighbor 14 minutes after she had been shot. She was taken to Charing Cross Hospital and announced dead on arrival just after 1 p.m. Tributes came in at a rate of 4 a minute to the BBC, while her fiancé Alan Farthing, brother Nigel and father, Jack, both journalists, mourned her death. The former Wirral schoolgirl had started out as a trainee reporter for the weekly paper The Western Mercury, with her brother and dad, before she moved to Radio Devon in 1985. Later she made the switch to regional television and then national. By 1995 she had made it to Crime Watch, a year after moving to Fulham. Jill's murder attracted a huge amount of media coverage, and for more than a year the Metropolitan Police tried to solve The mystery of Operation Oxbow with no brakes. They spoke to more than 2,500 people, and took 1,000 statements, before their investigation focused on Barry George. George lived just half a mile away from Jill, and had a history of stalking women, and so was put under surveillance. The man with the low IQ was charged, tried at the Old Bailey and convicted to life imprisonment in July 2001. But he maintained his innocence and appealed his conviction. By November 2007 his legal team successfully discredited forensic evidence, to do with the gunshot residue. A retrial was ordered, and on August 1, 2008, after 8 years in jail, George was declared an innocent man. Despite trying to claim £500,000 in compensation for his wrongful conviction, his case was turned down by the then Home Secretary, Kenneth Clark, who ruled he was not innocent enough. The High Court had previously ruled the then 53-year-old's conviction was not so unfair as to be considered a miscarriage of justice. In 2013 Scotland Yard confirmed the investigation was open, but the No officers had been working on it full-time. A forensic review of the case, that same year, cost nearly £600,000, but did not shed any light on finding out who was responsible for Jill's death. Last year the Sunday Mirror exposed the report, and stated that review concluded, "We have conducted a lengthy and highly detailed scientific investigation of this case. At the end of all this, our efforts have not directly assisted with the identification of Dando's killer." Its investigation revealed there had been crucial evidence not followed up by the police, and some 100 suspects never traced. A police spokesman said at that time, "If any new information comes to our attention, then this will be investigated." Every few years a new theory about who killed Jill, and why, comes to a head in the national press. With her work as a journalist and on the BBC programme Crime Watch, combined with the professional style assassination, there seems to be a wealth of theories. Over the years there have been allegations that police have not investigated a wealth of possibilities put forward about Jill's death. Sadly, none seem to have ever attracted the evidence to see police charge anyone, but here are just some of the most likely theories put forward. In 2014 a former colleague came forward, and said Jill was trying to expose a VIP pedophile ring just months before her death. The source said Jill raised concerns to her BBC bosses, about allegations of sexual abuse happening at the BB. The source told the Daily Star Sunday, "I don't recall the names of all the stars now, and don't want to implicate anyone, but Jill said they were surprisingly big names. I think she was quite shocked when told about images of children, and that information on how to join this horrible pedophile ring was freely available." Jill said others had complained to her about sexual matters, and that some female workmates also claimed they had been groped or assaulted. A BBC spokesman said they would always investigate allegations of this nature, but said they had not seen anything that substantiates these claims. One message to detectives on the Jill Dando case seemed to suggest that Serbian gangsters had plotted to kill her in revenge for the NATO-led bombing of a television station. Detectives were allegedly told that men had met at a London nightclub and planned the hit. Weeks before her death, Jill had been the face of a TV appeal for Kosovan Albanian refugees, making her a target from Serb paramilitaries. A message filed to detectives reportedly said, "Dando was murdered by a Serb hitman in revenge for the attack that NATO mounted." The people who planned Dando's murder meet and drink in a club called Scandal in London's West End. One of those involved is a tall male, with a swallow tattoo on his neck. A call to the BBC 3 days after Jill's murder contained an apparent death threat against watchdogs Anne Robinson and Alice Beer. Police traced the call to Gerrards Cross, Buckinghamshire, but never found the culprit. Slavko Kruvica, a journalist and critic of the Serb regime, was shot in the head at point-blank range outside his home 15 days before Jill's death. Alice Beer has also spoken about how both she and Jill received rape and kidnap threats leading up to her murder. She told the Mirror last year, "There are a lot of questions I would like answering. They've been at the back of my mind. I waited for a call from the police after Jill's death, but it never came. Nobody spoke to me about the threat. Nobody questioned anything. If no stone were left unturned in that investigation, then I would have been called." An intelligence report once put forward the names of 2 men, from one of London's most notorious crime families. Police searched the area around Jill Dando's home following her murder in 1999. Jill's murder has always had the hallmarks of a gangland professional hit. She died with a single bullet to the head in broad daylight on a busy street. Not a trace of DNA or a definitive sighting of the shooter was left. That intelligence report suggested that Jill was being targeted for an investigation into crime for the television. The lead detective on the Dando case at the time ordered no further action on the report. It came as prime suspect Barry George had already been charged. Documents seen by Barry George's legal team revealed a killer wrote a letter from prison claiming to be part of an IRA hit squad that killed her. Although dismissed by many, the letter claimed she had been targeted because of her position as presenter of Crime Watch. An image of a suspect released after Jill Dando's death in 1999. He claimed she was shot with a 9mm bullet before the gang escaped to a safe house in London in a Land Rover. He claimed the confession was to stop a cover-up, and Barry George taking the blame. The letter stated that the IRA was getting away with the murder to avoid problems with the Northern Ireland peace process. A report from the former National Criminal Intelligence Service suggested a barman called Joe from Tenerife could be the killer. A Crime Watch appeal helped to lock up road rage killer Kenneth Noy in 1996. The report is said to have stated, Joe runs a bar in Tenerife, frequented by leading expat criminals. Detective Chief Inspector Hamish Campbell led the initial investigation into Jill Dando's murder. He's described as a frustrated gangster reputed to owe money to Kenny Noy. There's been talk Joe has been keen to rehabilitate his reputation with gangster creditors. But Joe was never traced.
8. Mary Meyer. On October 12, 1964, Mary Pincott Meyer, the glamorous sister-in-law of Ben Bradlee and sometime lover of Jack Kennedy, was shot to death while walking along the C&O Canal in Georgetown. And in the hours that followed, the search for Meyer's scandalous diary would find the future Washington Post editor in a race with one of the Cold War's most legendary spies. Bradlee, who died Tuesday at age 93, is rightly lionized as a master journalist. But he was also a key figure in a Washington establishment that arguably no longer exists, the kind of guy who advised presidents even as he reported on them, and counted some of the CIA's top officers as personal friends. The day Meyer died, these roles converged. After Bradlee had returned home from identifying Meyer's body at the city morgue, he and his wife Toni received a call from the Tokyo-based artist and sculptor Anne Trute. She had been perhaps Mary's closest friend, Bradlee recounts in his memoir, A Good Life, and after she and Toni had grieved together, she told us that Mary had asked her to take possession of a private diary, if anything ever happened to me. And asked if we had found any such diary, and we told her we hadn't looked for anything, much less a diary. Bradlee and his wife began their search the next morning, only to find that someone else had been tipped off about the diary's existence. Meyer's door had been locked, but when Bradlee made his way in, he found James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's counterintelligence chief, standing there in the living room. He, too, was looking for Meyer's diary. Asked how he had gotten into the house, Angleton, who was among other things an expert at picking locks, shuffled his feet. Angleton was a Washington social figure in his own right, and his wife Cicely had been close with Mary, who had been married to another high-ranking CIA officer. We felt his presence was odd, to say the least, but took him at his word, and with him we searched Mary's house thoroughly, Bradlee wrote. After an exhaustive search, however, no diary was found. Angleton is one of those people who will always be shrouded in mystery. To his detractors, he was a half-mad paranoiac who nearly destroyed the CIA in his obsessive search for a Soviet mole. He was also an unquestionably brilliant master of the game with highbrow literary interests. Borrowing a line from T.S. Eliot, he memorably referred to the world of espionage as a wilderness of mirrors. He essentially invented the CIA's counterintelligence operation and, until his fall from grace nearly a decade after Meyer was killed, was perhaps the most powerful man at the agency. If British defector Kim Philby was, as many have called him, the spy of the century, wrote historian Ron Rosenbaum, James Angleton was the counter-spy of the century. And here he was, on his hands and knees, fruitlessly searching for a diary with his friend Ben Bradlee, then the Washington bureau chief for Newsweek. Eventually they both gave up, and parted ways. A few hours later, though, it occurred to Bradlee that Meyer could have kept the diary in her artist's studio, which was actually located behind his house. "We had no key," Bradlee wrote, "but I got a few tools to remove the simple padlock, and we walked toward the studio, only to run into Jim Angleton again, this time actually in the process of picking the padlock. He would have been red-faced, if his face could have gotten red, and he left almost without a word." Meyer, in addition to being considered one of the great, sought-after beauties of Washington at the time, was involved with the artist scene in the city and its nascent counterculture. She was friendly with Timothy Leary, with whom allegedly she dropped acid. Her paintings and paints in the palest colors, and simplest shapes, pretty much covered the studio, Bradlee wrote. After about an hour, Tony found the diary. It was slim, about 50 to 60 pages, according to Bradlee, and mostly concerned with her paintings. 10 or so pages of it, though, recounted her affair with President Kennedy, of which Bradlee and his wife had been completely unaware. "To say we were stunned doesn't begin to describe our reactions," Bradlee wrote. The Bradlees and the Kennedys had been close, and while there were persistent rumors that the president cheated on his wife, Kennedy had always denied it to Ben, even as he playfully flirted with Tony. Jackie Kennedy once joked to the Bradlees that Jack liked to call Tony his ideal woman. Jack, meanwhile, told Ben that he imagined the trouble-loving Mary must be hard to live with. It all threw the Bradlees off Jack's scent. Kennedy disliked having girlfriends, preferring one-off conquests instead, but made an exception for Mary Meyer. "I was truly appalled by the realization of the deceit involved," Bradlee wrote. "I remembered, for instance, Kennedy greeting Tony often by asking, 'How's your sister?' presumably including those occasions when he had just left her arms. Bradlee felt deceived by his friends, but, with both of them gone from my life, resentment seemed foolish. In hindsight, the affair made sense to him. They were attractive, intelligent, and interesting people before their paths crossed in this explosive way, and they remain that way in mind." Coming to terms with their relationship, he wrote, was harder for Tony, who had been kept in the dark by her sister and her friend. Mary Meyer had told her friend Ann Truth that she had wanted the diary destroyed, and while Bradlee felt it was in some sense a public document, he agreed that this was mostly a family matter, and went along with Mary's wishes. Here, again, Angleton comes into the picture. In exchange for the diary, he promised Ben and Tony he would destroy it. After all, who better to make something disappear than the CIA? And so Tony handed it over. In 1976, Ann Truth's troubled ex-husband told the National Enquirer about the diary, and Meyer's affair with JFK. He said that the pair had smoked weed together on one occasion, and that the romance lasted from 1962, until roughly Kennedy's assassination in 1963. Bradlee was on vacation when the story broke and, when reached by his own reporters for comment, told them off the record that the diary had been destroyed. Except it hadn't. A few years after the Enquirer story broke, Tony asked Angleton what, exactly, he had done with it, and Angleton admitted it was still in his possession. Tony demanded he give it back. Angleton complied, and Tony finally set the thing on fire with a friend as witness. None of us has any idea what Angleton did with the diary, while it was in his possession, nor why he failed to follow Mary and Tony's instructions, Bradlee wrote. According to Truth and Angleton's wife, he burned the loose papers and safeguarded the rest of it, insisting that he had never been explicitly told to destroy it in its entirety. The murder of Mary Pincott Meyer was never solved, and is still a regular fixture of JFK conspiracy narratives. The police apprehended a man shortly after her shooting, but without much by way of evidence against him, he was acquitted at trial. Regardless, the psychic blow of Mary's murder, coming so soon after his friend Jack Kennedy's, had a profound effect on Bradlee. Even after more than 40 months in a shooting war, after years as a police reporter, and after more years covering shooting wars in the Middle East, violence as a fact of my life had begun only with Kennedy's assassination, he wrote. And now, after Mary's almost unbearable funeral, he felt that his own world was somehow threatened.
9. Anna Nicole Smith. Anna Nicole Smith was only 39, when she died in a Florida hotel room 6 years ago, as a result of an overdose of prescription drugs. A former model, one-time stripper, and occasional reality TV star, she was a symbol of her times, a small-town girl turned sex goddess, who was perhaps best known for her surgically enhanced breasts, and a brief marriage to a billionaire 63 years her senior. In life, her story possessed some of the tragic qualities of her heroine Marilyn Monroe, including an addiction to painkillers, and she was devastated by the premature death of her son Daniel at the age of 20. But perhaps most tragically of all, Anna Nicole's demise meant her one surviving child, daughter Dᴈath, has absolutely no memories at all of her mother. Dᴈath was just 5 months old when her mother died, and her story is told in the documentary Life After Anna Nicole, which airs tomorrow night. Dᴈath's father, Anna Nicole's former boyfriend Larry Birkhead, narrates much of the program, and, even at 7 years old, Dᴈath's resemblance to her mother is striking. When she smiles, she looks just like her mom, says Larry. She's a beautiful little girl. Larry, softly spoken and in his own words just a geek from Kentucky, has raised Dᴈath on his own for the past 7 years. I have to be both parents, says Larry, 40. Some days she gets sad her mom's no longer here, but other days she's very accepting and will say, I have an angel for a mom. She knows Anna was a model and is in heaven, but obviously she's too young to know the whole story. The Anna Nicole Smith story isn't always palatable reading. The nomadic blonde was performing in a strip club when she met the elderly oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall, and became an instant sensation after featuring on the cover of Playboy, and replacing Claudia Schiffer as the model for Guess Jeans. She married Marshall in 1994, she was 26 to his 89, and his death a year later sparked a long court battle between Anna Nicole and the Marshall family over the tycoon's £1 billion estate. That's still going on. She began dating Larry, a photographer, in 2004, but it wasn't an easy relationship, he admits. She had an entourage and that got in the way sometimes, but I loved her and we talked about marriage. I was just some guy. I never thought I'd have a chance with Anna Nicole Smith, but we ended up having a child together. To preserve Anna Nicole's status as a sex symbol, she insisted they keep their relationship a secret, and she only informed Larry he was to be a father via text message. But I really wanted to be there at the birth, he says. I pictured myself in the delivery room and I thought the worst thing that could happen was that I'd faint. I was so wrong. He certainly was. Without warning, Anna Nicole decamped to the Bahamas with her lawyer, Howard K. Stern, and a couple of months later, in September 2006, gave birth to Dᴈath, news Larry only learned after paying a subscription fee to access Anna Nicole's website. I'd been planning on being there for the birth, and then one day it was just stripped from me. It was puzzling when she took off. I never saw her again, so we didn't have any kind of closure. Worse was to come. 3 days after Dᴈath was born, Anna Nicole's 20-year-old son from her first marriage, Daniel, died of a drug overdose. Anna was so close to Daniel that when she lost him, I didn't think she'd make it, says Larry. He was proved right. 5 months after Daniel's death, Anna Nicole also died of a drugs overdose. I kept thinking about what I could have done differently to help her, but I was helpless. By then Larry had become embroiled in a custody battle over Dᴈath, after several men came forward claiming to be the father, including Anna Nicole's lawyer Howard K. Stern, a previous boyfriend Mark Haddon and, most bizarrely, Zsa Zsa Gabor's husband Frederick Prince van Aanholt, who claimed to have had a 10-year affair with her. It hadn't mattered to me that Anna had wanted to keep our relationship secret, but when I had to prove paternity it became difficult. I only had about 20 pictures of us together, but I could have been a fan, anyone. In the end, while Dᴈath was living in the Bahamas with Stern, DNA tests confirmed Larry was the father. I didn't get to see my daughter for months, but I've got her now and that's all that matters. They live in Kentucky where Larry still does photography when he can. But I can't travel and take care of Dᴈath, so I now renovate properties for a living. Though he insists he wants to keep Dᴈath out of the limelight, Larry let her do a photo shoot for Guess Jeans like her mother. Dan Ellen loves the guest pictures of Anna, he says. It's like a connection to her. It's not a regular thing though. There is also the matter of a court hearing in January, where Anna Nicole's estate is still fighting for a share of J. Howard Marshall's fortune. Should they win, Dan Ellen could end up $50 million richer. I'm not fighting for it, says Larry. It's the estate's fight, and if it comes in, it'll be for Dan Ellen at 18, not me. My job is to prepare her for life. Larry once described Anna Nicole's story as a cautionary tale. He says, I always try to teach Dan Ellen about making decisions, and how they always have consequences. One day her doll fell off the stairwell and got hurt, and she suddenly asked, "Is that what happened to my mom?" I didn't know what to say except, "No, the doctors couldn't fix your mom, but if you keep yourself healthy and safe, you can grow up to be a good mom yourself." It's hard not to cry when she says things like that, but all I want is for Dan Ellen to grow up happy and be her own person.
10. JonBenet Ramsey. 20 years ago, a 911 call reporting a missing and possibly kidnapped 6-year-old girl launched a murder mystery, one that continues to endure, fascinate and perplex. In their Boulder, Colorado, home on the morning of December 26, 1996, parents John and Patsy Ramsey found a ransom note, handwritten on a pad with a black Sharpie that belonged to the family. It demanded $118,000, the exact amount of a bonus recently received by John, for the return of JonBenet, the couple's blonde, child pageant princess daughter. Later that morning, JonBenet's body, beaten and strangled with a garrote around her neck, and duct tape covering her mouth, was found in the basement of the family's Tudor brick home. Police are still looking for the killer. At least 37 books have explored the crime, along with at least a dozen TV programs and movies. None have helped resolve the cold case. John and Patsy, among more than 140 suspects, have been investigated. The Boulder County District Attorney at the time said, there was insufficient evidence to bring charges, after grand jurors voted to indict the parents in 1998, for child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. More recently, a CBS docuseries this past fall presented a case against JonBenet's brother Burke, then aged 9, as the likely killer, prompting the family's attorney to announce his intent to file a libel suit on Burke's behalf against the network. CBS issued a statement saying it stands by its report. The Ramsey's attorney, L. Lynn Wood, tells people he believes there is still a clear path to finding the murderer. The answer lies in the DNA profile drawn from a parent's saliva, he says, was identified in the crotch of JonBenet's underwear after she was found. That profile is the profile of the killer, Wood says. The question is whether we'll ever get a match. It clearly does not match Burke Ramsey, Wood says. In a court filing in October, Wood accused forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz of libeling Burke by stating that Burke killed JonBenet. Spitz's attorneys have since moved to dismiss the suit, which seeks damages in excess of $150 million and is based upon comments Spitz made to a Detroit radio station, after participating in the CBS docuseries. Spitz's attorneys responded in court papers by saying that his comments about Burke amount to free speech protected by the First Amendment, and arise from the public discussion about theories involving one of the major unsolved crimes of the 20th century. Wood disagrees. The United States Supreme Court has made it very clear that the First Amendment does not provide blanket protection to all statements characterized as opinion, Wood said in a written response to Spitz's motion to dismiss the case. Spitz's statements conveyed that Burke Ramsey killed his sister. That accusation is capable of being objectively proven to be false. Further, Spitz's accusation was based on undisclosed facts and, more importantly, false and distorted facts, Wood said. Simply stated, Spitz's accusation is legally viewed as a statement of fact, not a protected opinion. In a statement to People, the network said after the two-part The Case of JonBenet Ramsey aired in September, CBS stands by the broadcast and will do so in court. Wood points to just one statement about JonBenet's mother early in the broadcast, that he says undermines the entire series' claim of accuracy. The broadcast starts off by stating that Patsy Ramsey developed stage 4 ovarian cancer a couple of years after JonBenet's death, he says. Patsy Ramsey was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in 1993, 3 years before JonBenet was murdered. "If you can't get the little facts right," he says, "be very careful about what that person says about the big facts." 2 decades after JonBenet's death, however, the facts as they are known have yet to move the case toward closure or criminal charges. Investigators continue to review whether JonBenet was murdered by an outside intruder, or by someone within her own family. A 2008 statement by then Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacy, who publicly apologized to the family for placing them under suspicion, and announced that evidence cleared JonBenet's brother and parents, failed to halt debate. Earlier this month, current Boulder District Attorney Stan Garnett reiterated his belief that his predecessor erred in declaring anyone to be innocent. When any district attorney goes around and starts issuing exonerations based on a particular piece of evidence, that can be very misleading to the public about the nature of the case, Garnett told People. Citing the infamously compromised crime scene, he said, "The state of the evidence is not one where you could really say anything definitively." But Garnett does not now lay blame on the parents or anyone in the Ramsey family, who are totally covered by the presumption of innocence, he said. "If we ever change our opinion about that with regard to the Ramseys or anyone else, we will file charges and say what we have to say about the case in open court." Patsy died in 2006. John, 72 and remarried, owns a promotional marketing firm, and lives in Charlevoix, Michigan, in Las Vegas. Burke, 29, is a software developer in Indianapolis. Burke ended his long public silence about the case last September in a 3-part broadcast interview with Dr. Phil McGraw, stating he had not killed his sister and that his parents had not covered for him. "I know that's not what happened. Look at the evidence. Or lack thereof," he said. John shared his own account in a 2000 book written with Patsy, The Death of Innocence, the untold story of JonBenet's murder and how its exploitation compromised the pursuit of truth. In 2012 he also wrote The Other Side of Suffering. The father of JonBenet Ramsey tells the story of his journey from grief to grace, chronicling his loss of JonBenet, Patsy, and a daughter, Beth, from an earlier marriage who was killed in a 1992 car accident. On December 14, Boulder police announced they are working with the Colorado Bureau of Investigations to again apply the latest DNA testing technology on evidence in the unsolved case, to determine if this new technology could further this investigation. Garnett told People, "I don't anticipate that it's going to lead to any dramatic developments in the case, but obviously we would love to solve it." Asked how the years without any resolution have affected John, the Ramsey's attorney Wood tells People, "I'm hesitant to try to put words into John's mouth. Only he can express his feelings accurately, because he's had to live the experience. I'm sure that there is a mixture of emotions that John experiences. It probably goes from frustration to hope, perhaps at times to anger," he says. "But I think that John's predominant position has always been one of hope, that one day the killer of his daughter will be identified. He is still involved in efforts to himself aid in the investigation. John," says Wood, "is a man of deep faith, and I think that's what has helped him survive."